Good afternoon, everyone. We are back with BWW Connection, the talk show in the breaks of the Brazil Water Week 2024. We have Luiz Risotto, the director of ABI São Paulo and the coordinator for the thematic chamber for ABIs, and he will also be helping us discuss our seventh topic. We have here with us the general coordinator of the Brazil Water Week and director of ABI São Paulo. Good afternoon, Marisa. Good afternoon, Danielle. Good afternoon, Daniela. Good afternoon, Luis. And our expert with us today is Vanya Elizabeth Schneider. She holds a doctor's in water resources engineering, and she's a professor at the Caxias University. Professor Vanya will be sharing with us a presentation on climate crisis, the global phenomenon, and extreme events in Rio Grande do Sul.
Vamos lá, então. Okay, let's start. A ideia, então, é nós estarmos apresentando rapidamente,
we'll quickly expose
cenário em que nós nos
the
encontramos
scenario
nesse
in which
momento
we currently
no Rio
find
Grande do
ourselves
Sul,
in
mas
the state of Rio
trazendo
Grande do
também essa
Sul, but
perspectiva
also bringing
do cenário
an
global.
outlook of
Então,
global
já diretamente partindo,
environment.
que
So
nós estamos observando, na
we
verdade, um
are
fenômeno global,
actually
né,
watching a global
em
phenomenon
que nós
unfolding,
observamos altas temperaturas,
where there are high
temperaturas aumentando
temperatures,
rapidamente,
increasing
sendo que nos 10 últimos
temperatures,
anos, em 10
and in
anos
the
seguidos, nós tivemos de
past
2014 a
10 years, from
2023,
2014 to
recordes de temperatura no
2023, we had
planeta.
record
Então,
high temperatures on the planet.
previsões que não faltaram, nós chegamos a esse momento
So
que há uma
we have
conjuntura
reached
de mudanças
this
climáticas
moment in which there is a
induzidas
combined set of
pelo aquecimento global,
climate
e o El Niño,
changes,
com a sua anomalia do Pacífico,
such as the El Nino
apresentando
phenomenon, which
temperatura no mar
changes
de
and
3,6
increases the
graus
temperature
acima
of
da
the
média,
Atlantic Ocean to
e
over
podemos
3
considerar aí
degrees
também uma
in
questão
temperature, and we
relacionada
can
com o
also
desmatamento da Amazônia.
tackle the Amazonian deforestation. This also plays an equation in this climate crisis.
Então, se nós observarmos aí, dia
So,
3 de julho de
on
2023,
July
nós tivemos aí o
2023,
dia mais quente
we had the
registrado
hottest day
em escala
ever
global. A
recorded
temperatura
on a
média
global basis.
planetária,
The
ela atingiu
average global basis
17,01
reached
centígrados, e o
17.1
recorde anterior
degrees
é batido
Celsius,
em
while the
2016,
previous
foi 16,
record in
92.
2016
O
had
que se
been over
observa? Se nós
16 degrees.
observarmos aqui uma
So,
evolução
if we look at this
analisada desde
progression since
1850, nós vamos ver
1850,
que a partir
we can
de
see that
1967,
effective
nessa
from
ampliação que aqui está, a
1967, as we can
temperatura
see here in the
global
graph,
só tem
global
subido e atingido a
temperatures
sua
have
máxima aqui
increased
em
and reached the maximum
2023.
records in
O que
2023.
que isso, então,
So what does
nos
this in turn
reporta? Nós temos uma
entail
questão
to
chamada
us?
efeito estufa.
We
Nós
have the
temos uma
greenhouse
situação
gas
derivada, digamos
emissions,
assim, das
which
emissões de
stems
gases
from
de efeito
emissions
estufa na atmosfera,
of greenhouse
que
gases
vem
into
se
the
elevando ao longo
atmosphere,
do tempo,
and
desde
this has been increasing
1880, e que
over time,
acompanha
and
praticamente
which
essa questão da elevação da temperatura.
follows this
As
question
coisas estão andando
of global
juntas.
increases in
E
temperature.
chegamos
So
a uma
these go hand
situação
in
em que a
hand. So we reach
concentração
a
de gás carbônico
situation
na
in which the
atmosfera se
concentration
aproxima
of
dos valores
carbon
registrados há cerca de
outside
14 milhões
reached
de
the
anos.
levels
E o que
at
isso significa? Significa que nós
14
estamos
million
aí
years. So this
chegando
means
num
that we are
patamar
reaching
que
a
seria
threshold
momento crítico
which would
para
be
o
the
planeta.
critical,
Nós
let's say, turning point
estabelecemos
for
aí,
the
estamos aí em
planet.
422
So
ppm, né?
we are
E
423
precisaríamos ficar
ppms,
em torno de
and we would need to be
350
at
ppm.
around
Mas o que
350.
acontece é que a concentração,
But
basicamente, de
what
dióxido de
happens
carbono,
that the concentration of
desde
carbon
1750
dioxide
na atmosfera,
since
aumentou
1800s has
150%.
increased
A de gás metano,
150% methane gas, has increased over 200%, and nitric oxide also has a significant increase. So we look at 2022, and the emissions of carbon dioxide here increased 3.3 ppm only in the year of 2022, but already together with this increase in global temperature since the 60s. So this is the current scenario which we're in a global level. So 2024, Brazil, the state of Rio Grande do Sul. What exactly is happening here? So from these set of factors, we can take them to our local context and apply them there. So we already had been, let's say, warned that the increase in the temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean would be an atypical scenario, and this in turn could lead to specifically the state of Rio Grande do Sul, certain significant climatic events. And also from June to September last year, we already faced a scenario with cyclones that took place in June and July of last year, as well as in August of last year. And in September of 2023, which was the pinnacle of the climatic event last year, with heavy flooding and heavy rains in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. And now we are even at a more critical moment in 2024. We had already been alerted by this through a study that Brazil had commissioned, and all these factors had been disclosed. So we were aware of them. And it already announced extreme climate events taking place in Brazil, more specifically in southern Brazil. So we are facing a situation in which temperatures in April were significantly higher than the normal ones. We had specific Elysian winds coming from the Atlantic Ocean, which also had elevated water temperature, winds transferring these masses from the Amazon, and the phenomenon.
And then we have the flying rivers of the Amazon. Those are masses of moist air that spread all over Brazil, and thanks to the flying rivers, the southeast and the Midwest get a lot of rain, or enough rain to avoid the desertification. The moistness that's not absorbed by the Amazon and spread through the winds finds this barrier, the Andes, that forces the flying rivers towards the southwest and even the south, reaching Uruguay and Argentina. So what is happening right now in Brazil? We see that there is a high pressure system that is active in the central region of the continent, including the Midwest and the Southwest, which prevent moist air masses to go up. So those masses of air that is moist from the Amazon meets the cold, moist air masses that come from Patagonia, which is actually pretty common. We get announcements of cold fronts from Patagonia all the time, and they end up lingering on our mountain ranges. But then we have the meeting of those two air masses, and this will result in high rainfall over Rio Grande do Sul state, since this system of high pressure that installed in the central region of the continent don't allow these this cold water masses to spread in the hinterland of Brazil. As a result, we had 500 to 700 millimeters of rainfall over Rio Grande do Sul in just 5 days, which is a unique event in comparison to everything that's known about this region historically. Also, the Permanent Council of Meteorology for Agriculture in March 2024 announced that we would have abnormal high temperature areas and also temperature events from April to May. So the predictions were there. So why didn't anyone mind those warnings is another matter. So at least 5 municipalities recorded over 1,000 millimeters of rainfall between 28 April and May, as you can see on the map. For Porto Alegre, in May, the rainiest month in the historical series, date back to 1941 and 2024 with 513.6 millimeters. Santa Maria in the center also recorded 513 millimeters of rains between April and May, April 26 and May 5, 3.5 times higher than the expectations for the entire month. If we look at the state of Rio Grande do Sul, it can be broken down into 3 major water basins, and considering what occurred in the metropolitan region of Porto Alegre, all the water that drained into the Guaíba Basin, coming from the regions comprehending the Taquariantas, Jacuí River, and Caí, and also the Sinos River and Gravataí River, the entire drainage of the area ends up in Porto Alegre. The Guaíba received almost half of the water of Itaipu in under 1 week. And in the mountain ranges of Rio Grande do Sul, the highest ever rainfall levels were recorded in an unprecedented condition. So the resulting scenarios were flooding in the valleys and landslides in the mountains. We can see here the number of landslides that we observed in our mountains. Also because of the geology of the region, landslides with all the consequences that come with it, that led to a loss of human life and also loss of highways. It's going to be a while before communication between the different municipalities is reestablished because of the landslides, and we're also tracking progress in the regions shown in the slide, because there are cracks in the terrain in those regions, showing that the process of landslides could continue. Several massives of soil can still slide, which would further jeopardize our situation. As for the state, considering the 497 towns in the state, 425 were hit. So it was not only the metropolitan region of Porto Alegre, it was not only the mountains area that we call the Guaíba Basin that is divided between the Taquari River and Antas River. We also have the Caique River. Most of the rivers draining into Porto Alegre come from the mountain ranges in the state. And the color that you can observe in the rivers and also in the plume reaching to Porto Alegre, this is the soil that is being drained into the water. So this, of course, leads us to rethink soil occupation in the highlands of Rio Grande do Sul. Well, landslides. There are three factors to consider here. First of all, the geomorphology of the mountain ranges, the use and occupation of the soil, and also the rainfall levels. But it's also become clear that the regions that were hardest hit were the ones that in our forestry code are the mountain tops. This is where, we had major landslides because, up to the top of the mountains, there was human occupation, or then at the crest of mountain ranges where water starts infiltrating, and then there is, water leakage and infiltration between the soil and the rocks, and then, the soil slides down, also slopes with an inclination higher than 45 degrees, and the marginal areas of rivers and also riparian forests. So the most important factor leading to landslides is soil use and occupation, which when confronted to such a high level of rainfall leads to landslides. Flooding in the metropolitan region, considering that all of this water drains into the Jacuí Delta, and that we can call the Guaíba River because of the flow rate and the dragging of sediments. We can see that the soil that was removed from the highlands are now being drained into this delta, and I think that my colleagues could perhaps explain this even better to you, because later this will move into another hydrographic area, which is the coastal range of Rio Grande do Sul, affecting the Patos Lagoon, which is the sink through which all of this water comes out into the ocean. So the water in the Guaíba is held up. It's not drained so quickly, then it dissipates into the Patos Lagoon. And when we reach Pilatos and Rio Grande, once again, we have a narrowing because the passage is narrow, and as a consequence, it will take a very long while for this water to be fully drained. So even though we're celebrating the lowering of the water level in Porto Alegre, this is not what we observe in lowlands. Okay, we have less than 1 minute Professor. We would love to hear more from you, but unfortunately, we have to stick to our time. We have a lot to discuss here today at WWW. So this is just, the scenarios. This is the coastal region of Rio Grande do Sul state, which creates, of course, a drainage, a stranglehold or chokehold. So how to face all of this? We have several risks: physical, environmental, biological, chemical, psychological, and even epidemiological as a consequence of all factors, and sanitation and urban drainage become two of the most important challenges. So we've had 3 events in less than 1 year. Predictions point to a repetition of even more severe events as a consequence of climate change, landslides in the mountains, and another issue that we cannot ignore, which is the increase of or in the loss of drainage ability and the amount of debris that is created as a result of all of this. And then I will be happy to discuss this with my colleagues further later. Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor. And before we start with the analysis, we would like to express our solidarity to the state of Rio Grande do Sul, ABIS and its members. Now our guests, Anderson, climate change in combination with the hydrology of Rio Grande do Sul state, do they contribute to extreme events? And just as a message to our guests, we have just 4 minutes for each participation.
Bom dia, pessoal. Muito
Thank you very
prazer estar
much. Good
presente aqui
morning.
na
It's a great
Brazil
pleasure
Water
to
Week
be
e
participating in the Brazil
discutindo
Water
esse
Week
tema, né,
and
extremamente
to address
importante
this
para a
very
hidrologia do Rio
timely
Grande do Sul e para o Brasil também,
issue
né,
for
nesse
the
evento,
hydrology of Rio
possivelmente
Grande do Sul and
com
of
certeza,
Brazil
né, o
in
maior
this
desastre
event
hidrológico
that,
que a gente
well,
tem no
this is the
Brasil,
largest
talvez na América do
catastrophe
Sul.
ever recorded
Então,
in
na
Brazil,
verdade,
perhaps in Latin
digamos assim,
America.
o Rio Grande do Sul, ele de fato
Rio
precisa
Grande
se
do
preparar
Sul
muito, né, para
needs to
um
really
futuro muito próximo, eu
prepare
diria assim,
for the near
porque
future
as
events
condições elas
because the
indicam, né,
conditions
que
indicate
esses eventos, né, sejam
that
eles na
these
magnitude, na
events,
frequência, eles vão se
whether
tornar
of the
maiores,
same
né? Então, quer dizer, a gente tem
magnitude
probabilidade dos
or
eventos ficarem
with the same
mais
frequency,
frequentes e
will
mais
become more
intensos, né?
severe. So more
Então essa é
frequency
uma
and more
questão
severity at
importantíssima,
the
assim.
same
Então,
time.
quando tivermos, né,
So Rio Grande
toda a
do
questão de
Sul cannot fail
reconstrução
to address
saindo do papel,
this
né, a
in the
gente precisa
rebuilding
de
of the
fato
state.
considerar que esses
When
eventos eles vão ficar
implementing
mais frequentes
changes,
e mais
we
intensos, né?
need to
Então
remember
essa é uma
that
questão que a
these
gente
events
precisa
will become
considerar, né, que os
more
modelos do
severe and
CIMIP
more
6
frequent.
indicam isso, né?
This
Isso
is what
vale
we see
tanto
from
para
several
chuvas
scientific
intensas, né,
models,
tanto quanto para cheias. Então
both
essa é a
in
resposta
terms of
que nós
floods
obtivemos ao
and
conduzir estudos, né,
also
de impactos
record-breaking
das mudanças
rainfall
climáticas nos
levels.
recursos hídricos
So this
da América do
shows,
Sul, né?
that
De uma
climate
maneira
change will
geral,
produce
o estado do Rio Grande do
consequences in
Sul
the
ele vai ser bastante
hydrology of South
impactado porque
America.
exatamente
The
ele
state of
está,
Rio
né,
Grande do
numa
Sul
zona, digamos assim, de
is
transição,
in a
numa zona de
transition zone,
choque
which
entre
makes
massas de
it
ar
more
quente e massas de ar
vulnerable
frio, né?
to
Então
the shock
a
of
Vânia falou muito em
hot air
ciclones,
and
né,
cold air
extratropicais,
masses.
mas esses de fato
Vania
são
talked about
corriqueiros, né? Especialmente nos meses de outono e
the
inverno
cyclones,
na
but they're
região
very
sul do
common
Brasil,
in the
mas de
months,
fato
the
eles
winter months in the
com
south of Brazil.
digamos assim, com o aumento da temperatura e com
With the
as
increase in
diferenças que a gente vai
temperature and
ter, né,
with
entre
the
massas de
differences
ar
between
muito
uh,
quentes da região central do
the
Brasil e as massas de
temperature
ar
of
muito frias que
very
vêm do
hot
sul da América do
uh,
Sul e do
air
continente
masses
antártico,
than those that come
esses eventos
from
eles podem
the
também ficar mais
south and
extremos.
are
Então isso
very
significa
cold,
que
this
possivelmente
could
teremos
lead
tempestades
to
com vento mais
storms,
intensas no estado
more
do Rio Grande do
intense
Sul,
winds in the
né?
state of Rio
Então
Grande do Sul.
esse evento talvez ele seja
So this
digamos assim
event I think is just heralding a scenario that
né, não meses, mas
that
para as
we
décadas
should
futuras, desculpa.
be expecting in future
Então essa é uma
decades.
questão importantíssima, eu
And
diria assim, né?
the
E a
importance
outra
of this
questão, da
cannot
mesma
be
forma, né, que a gente está
minimized.
falando sobre
Just as we're
eventos
talking
extremos do ponto
about
de vista da
extreme
precipitação,
events
uma
from the
questão
point of view,
importantíssima que a gente
from
precisa
the
lembrar,
rainfall in point
né,
of
é
view,
exatamente que há 3, 4
we
anos
should not
atrás, o
forget
Rio
that
Grande do
4 years
Sul ele
ago,
passava pela
Rio
maior,
Grande
né,
do Sul was
seca
going
histórica que já
through
foi registrada aqui no nosso
its
estado. Então nós
worst
tivemos basicamente 3
draft
anos, né,
ever.
com
For
índice
3
de
years,
precipitação
we
muito
had
abaixo da normal climatológica.
rainfall levels
E
that were
basicamente
far
isso
below
mostra, por exemplo, como
expectations.
as
And this
mudanças, as variações na
indicates
temperatura dos
how
oceanos impactam o
variations in
estado do Rio Grande
ocean
do Sul. Então nós
temperature also
estávamos num
cause an
laninha,
impact in
né,
the
muito intenso
state of
e
Rio
muito
Grande do Sul.
persistente, né, que
La
nos
Niña at the
durou
time
vários
was
anos e que
very
causou
intense.
secas
It
muito
persisted through several years,
no sul do Brasil.
and
E uma das
it
características,
was
por
the cause
exemplo,
of droughts in the south of
da
Brazil.
nossa região sul do Brasil, né, em
One
relação
of the
aos impactos
characteristics of the south of
do El
Brazil,
Niño e Laninha, é
when
exatamente que nós
impacted
teremos
by El Nino
transições
and La
muito
Nina, is
rápidas,
that
muito abruptas
transitions are
entre um
very
estado e
fast
outro. Então a gente
and very
sai de um evento,
abrupt
por exemplo,
between the states.
de
So
Laninha,
we
né,
could
que
leave
causa
a La
secas e, por
Nina
exemplo, uma das consequências
event
foram perdas
causing droughts,
agrícolas
and
gigantescas nos
one of the
últimos 3 anos, né?
consequences of
E
that was
muito
crop
rapidamente a
failure
gente entra
to
em
a very
períodos
large extent.
muito
And
úmidos,
all of a
muito
sudden, we
chuvosos, né? E
move
aí a gente tem
into
essa característica
rainy
de
spells,
chuvas
very
intensas.
rainy
Então, nos
spells
modelos
with
climáticos,
lots of storms. Thank you very much. We're going to continue discussing
tá
this
bom.
later because unfortunately we need to give time to the other guests. My apologies for interrupting. Thank you. Nancy, just 4 minutes for you to answer the question. How to address challenges? How can we use planning and preservation to manage rainwaters? Thank you very much. First of all, welcome to the panel. First of all, I want to thank the invitation, and I think that Vania gave us a very good overview of the impact of climate change. So I would just try to focus on use, soil, and occupation and how it should be planned. We know that prevention is always better than recovery. We'll need to recover and rebuild because no planning was done in the past. The basin, the water basin, is the ideal unit for managing our water resources. So we need to implement a system that currently is not in place. For example, when we're talking about water basins, what happens in the metropolitan region of Porto Alegre will affect the entire basin. So occupation of lowlands, occupation of slopes, all of this should be taken into account in regional and basin management plans, especially in the metropolitan region where we have common services. The municipal limits are not the basic ones. However, based on our constitution, it's up to the municipalities to approve use of soil. So we have to strike a balance between regional plans, water basin plans, and municipal plans. We observe that risk areas are being that there are towns under risk. Implementation of works of this sort, of course, is not enough. We have to maintain and operate those plans. This is another region that compounded the situation. So it's a set of fundamental causes, and we should look at the root causes, not at the effects. But everything depends on planning, environmental education, preservation of forests, and also compliance with urban and rural regulations, also compliance with the the municipal laws, the management of water resources laws. So it's a complete and very complex framework where there should be, a concerted effort. We need a concerted, integrated action.
Thank you. You're right. This is a moment for synergy. Rafael, welcome. Can you talk a little bit about the environmental impacts, the post-disaster environmental impacts? Good afternoon, Daniela. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Unfortunately, we must discuss this topic as we are living through it. As Vanya and Anderson mentioned, we are faced with the largest climate event in Rio Grande do Sul and maybe in the Americas. Considering everything that is being presented, we are now seeing that our structures have collapsed, all of them, the water supply infrastructure, our drainage infrastructure. So now, as the water enters, as the river waters enter cities, and also the rainfall couldn't outflow. So with the collapse of our network, we had situations in which our treatment plants did not work to supply water to our populations, and there were a lot of cases in which pumping stations and treatment stations, due to a power shortage and due to floods, they stopped working. So we had direct contact between untreated wastewater with drinking water as well. So we saw people having to dive into this polluted water, and this has led to, of course, very serious health problems. As Professor Vanya mentioned, many other problems will be created in the future. And we also saw industries and utilities that were not very well prepared. There were many different notices and warnings issued beforehand, talking about the possibility of extreme climate events taking place. Despite all of that and all of the warnings, some companies did not get prepared. So this has led to them losing their products, their raw materials. And now these materials are in the water. So now in the water we have fuels, nitrogen-based products, which will compromise our water supply. So many different problems that are leading to the collapse of our environment. This means that this is a topic that must be widely discussed, and it will have to be widely discussed in our society. Thank you, Rafael. Welcome, Paulo. How can we deal with the impact on people's health?
Ok, obrigado.
Paulo, you're on mute.
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Discutindo e mostrando pouco do
I'm
que nós
very
não
happy to be
estávamos
here
preparados.
discussing
E,
and
quando
showing a little
nós,
bit what we are not
que
prepared for.
povo
When
gaúcho, e esse exemplo espero que
here
seja
in Rio Grande do Sul,
ele
when we were slammed by
país
this
todo
extreme
para a
event,
gente poder
it just showed that we are not ready. And I hope that this is an example for the whole country. And I hope that we can contribute to improving our system. Well, just very briefly, I will talk about our water supply issue. As Rafael mentioned, the infrastructure in some cities were damaged, both the treatment infrastructure as well as the water distribution infrastructure. This has led to many days of water shortage. We also had problems with our wastewater treatment system. And now, of course, we are having problems with waste in general. there are many different kinds of waste in our water, and the debris is also playing a major role here. There are some studies that were conducted showing that we might have 47 million tons of waste in our water. This volume is much higher than the waste that we have in the Gaza Strip. Well, these are very high volumes, but the destruction of a bridge where we have a concrete density of 2,400 kilos per cubic meter. We are talking about a very high volume, and we will have to deal with it. If we compare this with the floods from September and November, we had over 130,000 tons in the Taquari Valley, and the region had was still struggling with it. Well, now regarding the impacts on the health of our population, there are 2 points to be raised here. A major problem that we will face is mental health problems. People are facing a very stressful situation. We see also that some people are now feeling depressed. So a lot of people lost everything, and they will go back to their houses and won't find anything there. And the most serious, I would say, are those stupid people, I would say, those who have disseminated fake news during this period. This has really hindered our processes, our water supply process, and the distribution of food, clothes. It's unbelievable to see people that, even in face of this catastrophe, disseminate fake news. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paulo. I am sorry to interrupt. It's very important for us to show both sides of this same coin, but we cannot forget, of course, diseases that affect animals. Thousands of animals were rescued, and they are also stressed. And this is one of the concerns that we should keep in mind as well. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your contribution. We'd like to thank Professor Vania for her talks. And it was very good to hear from a professor working at the Disaster Prevention Institute. And I would like to thank everyone as well who joined us in this discussion. Nancy Anderson Hoff, professor at the Institute of Hydraulic Research and a PhD from the Federal University of São Paulo, Paulo Robinson, president of ABIS Rio Grande do Sul, and Rafael Volquin, the coordinator for the thematic chamber at ABIS and the coordinator of the topic around water resource. Marisa and also Luis, what else would you bring to light in our discussion in this scenario in Grande do Sul? I'm very happy that we had Professor Vernier giving this presentation. She was able to give us an overview. But just very briefly, now that I have 10 seconds left, I would say that the disaster was major. And I think that we will still need all forms of help. We will need help from volunteers, technical help, help from the government. There's a lot to be done. Paulo had to speak really fast, but he touched on important topics such as mental health and animal health. So my last comment is, let's keep this network alive, this network of help alive. Thank you. Marisa has already put forth some important matters, but I was quite surprised by some of the numbers that were shared by Professor Vanya. If I'm not mistaken, she mentioned 5 municipalities where the rainfall rate was almost 1,000 millimeters. When we had the tragedy here in Bertioga, it was around 700 millimeters, and it was unimaginable. The consequences were unimaginable. So this level of rainfall in Rio Grande do Sul was something that is quite shocking, actually. One thing that Abis has been doing and that Rafael has been talking about widely is climate change and climate uncertainty. We know for sure that these events will keep happening. The question is, when will the next event take place? So we must prepare, we must plan. Creating plans is very important. We must have monitoring systems, warning systems. Professor Nancy also talks about having water basin plans that are compatible. We talked about master plans and other different codes that must be implemented. We also must have hydrological monitoring plans, which was also mentioned. So it's something that we must develop. We must develop plans and policies for the reconstruction of the city of Rio Grande do Sul as well. Now we will have 3 other guests joining us online. Mairo Guerino, the National Vice President for ABIS, Maria Lucia Coelho, National Director of ABIS, and Vanessa Brito, National Director of ABIS for the Northeastern region rather. Welcome, welcome. Let's go back to Professor Vanya's talk. I would like to hear from you. I want to know your opinion about this topic, starting with Maria Lucia. Maria Lucia, welcome. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Well, when hearing Vanya's presentation and Anderson, Nancy's, and others' comments, I am sure that more than ever, we must seek to fulfill what we have in the Paris Agreement and think about how we can do risk management. I don't like to talk much, so I'll leave this question for others to answer. My only concern is that we must fulfill what was presented in the Paris Agreement. Mario, please, the floor is yours. Welcome, Mario. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. As we saw in Professor Vanya's presentation, the events in Rio Grande do Sul are now very common in many other places, as Luis and others mentioned. We saw similar events in Bertioga, for example. So, due to climate change, these events will become ever more common. Well, I would add some data to our discussion. So, the Geological Survey of Brazil conducted a survey in more than 700 plants installed in the country, and they concluded that over the past decade, the record of floods and also droughts has increased significantly. In the previous decade, from 2004 to 2013, there were 182 droughts and historical droughts. And in the decade before, it has gone up in the same period. the history of droughts has really increased quite a lot dramatically. At the same time, this survey concluded, as Professor mentioned, it has shown a continuous warming starting from the 1960s until today. And if we once again look back at the survey, we see that these historical droughts and floods have been increasing in frequency, and this is a consequence of global warming. And we can add to that global warming combined with land use and occupation. And of course, we must talk about soil use and also preventive infrastructure. I believe there have been some failures in the city of Porto Alegre. So combining all of these factors, we see the event that is now happening in the city in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. So I think that one of the solutions would be revisiting our land use and our mode of production, our way of life. And as Lucia mentioned, we must fulfill the Paris Agreement. This is essential. And of course, we must use technology and we must have legislation and we must really enforce these legislations, these pieces of legislation. If it seems to me that environmental agencies saw that the environmental legislation was not being completely enforced, and of course, this is quite impactful. Another point is prevention. We must know that we have or we will have to live with these events that are going to become ever more frequent. So we must, of course, focus on monitoring and also on the construction of infrastructures that will prevent events such as this one. And these events are going to become more frequent, as we all know. So that's my analysis of this process. Thank you. Vanessa, the floor is yours. Welcome. Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, leading on from what Mario said, I also understand that there is a consensus that it is necessary for us to promote adaptation measures. So these adaptation measures must be promoted at the national and global level, independent of these extreme events. I think that we must promote measures from the moment of planning of infrastructure and when these sanitation and water and wastewater services are implemented, we must think of these extreme events. We know that climate change even is inevitable. So from the perspective of my region here, the Northeast, we have drought events that are very common in the semi-arid region, and we have learned to live with them. We do have policies that allow us to deal with these problems. We first must admit that these are natural cyclic events that do not need to be squashed. Actually, we must need to learn how to deal with that. People are used to living in these conditions, in these drought conditions. So we must learn how to deal with these situations. And of course, we must create different incentives and technological alternatives to strengthen the way we deal with these events. And we also must have alternative technologies so that we can actually fight against this problem, of course, without neglecting social and other environmental aspects of this region. So I would say that we must learn how to deal with these events and how to adapt to them. And of course, we must guarantee access to policies, human, economic growth as well. All of these aspects must be adapted to these changes. We know that it's something that needs to be done now so that we can deal with other problems. This is not something that is happening in Rio Grande do Sul or in the northeastern region, in the semi-arid region. This is a collective will. We must have collective action and also political will. We must have policies to promote the strengthening of these policies that must be adapted to deal with these phenomena that are becoming more and more common.
Thank you again, and we'll have Luis and Marisa again to speak with us and to go back to the debate and these subjects that are so significant, and hearing after the experts about the state of Rio Grande do Sul. I think we just witnessed a panel here at lunchtime that was very important because we brought information on climate change, hydrographic traits of Rio Grande do Sul, drainage aspects. We talked about impacts on health. And I think that we achieved this with a significant technical depth with very important comments and remarks, both from our Brazilian and foreign peers. And now we're also talking about rain and extreme droughts in northeastern Brazil. So they learned how to manage and deal with this. But I would just like to point back again to something important, which is that I think one of our duties here upon bringing this into discussion and inviting experts to discuss on this, we make counter arguments to something that was very harmful, which is a lack of information, as well as fake news and lies, spread of lies, which disarrange everything and do not contribute to anything. So I think that in this space that we have here, in addition to fulfilling our role and bringing specialists and having high-level debates, and I'm very happy, I say again, that Professor Vanya was able to overcome her technical hardships and give her presentation, because I had the opportunity of witnessing a very structured lecture showing us what proceeds and what does not proceed. And so I'd like to thank Vanya again, as well as our other speakers. I don't know how much time we have left, but in the first statement I made, I thought about stressing the importance of planning, because you really need to anticipate and think ahead of things, because of course it's evident now that we'll have to deal with extreme weather events in the future, because as she said, the crisis was already alerted. People knew it was going to take place, but regardless, we need to seriously think about the future, what kind of sanitation plans we need to put in place, and not only to fulfill with legislation. So we really need to structure this framework within the territories and think about all the traits so that we ensure a safe urban growth. We need to map out risk areas, but we can't occupy risk areas. So if you need people to vacate the areas, then you'll need to tell them where to go. So that concerns planning cities. And in my opinion, this is also very important, because you need to use this moment of climate disaster to prevent it from happening again. So thinking about other ways of treating it. Perfect, your assessment, and Paulo's as well, about fake news, about the harmful impacts that they have had. So amidst the chaos this fake news just adds on to this chaos, and so additionally, it's very important to hear from the experts. I really add to what she said. I sign off on them, and some of these data is very concerning. The figure that you showed here, because world records, global records, and in increasing temperatures, well, the Paris Agreement, and two things that I would like to point out in addition to planning that Marisa commented on very well, and it concerns the work that we carry out here in technical areas, but also concerning reconstruction. I think IBIS has a key role, as well as water technical chambers in the field. They can significantly contribute to this, to the end of providing guidance for properly draining cities and occupying ground in a proper way, and work with this technical guidance with regard to what can or cannot be in a specific, let's say, area, part of the city. So I think we have a lot to add. We have a lot of expertise, ideas, experts. ABIS is always open to hear thoughts on this matter. I think this is an enormous opportunity for us to contribute. And my second point is adding to what Marisa said about the existence and ongoing network of support. So this is key, and this doesn't entail only the society which needs funds or aid, but I'm also talking about public authority, city halls talking to government and having an understanding between them, as well as companies working, and the civil society working together seamlessly, and to the end of keeping this network alive and well, because this is very important. This to happen, as well as providing an example of what to do for other municipalities that I really hope do not undergo these kind of extreme climate situations. But in light of such an uncertain climate scenario, we really need to take into account these issues. So we really need to think about when the next event will happen, and the best solution is always to prevent. Thank you very much for the participation of all our invited directors, Ms. Crisotto, Mario Guerino, and Marisa Guimarães, who will stay with us here in our next panel. And so our next session is international cooperation and assistance on the area of water. Have an excellent session.